All right, so today we have my good friend Paco Nathan, and what I hope to be will be a regular feature of the Data Exchange podcast, a true data exchange where Paco and I will exchange some of the things that we've been following in AI and data, but more broadly technology, and kind of discuss it between us. So, as many of you know, Paco is the founder of Derwin.ai, a boutique consultancy focused on data and AI. But he's also been a longtime friend of the podcast and basically someone who helps me with so many things at conferences and all the things that I do. So, Paco, welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thank you, Ben. I'm grateful to be here.
And so today, maybe I'll kick things off with the first thing that I've been kind of been interested in more broadly, but precipitated by the release of Sora or the announcement of Sora, which is text to video. And full disclosure, uh, Paco and I, and of course the rest of the world, none of us have actually tried Sora because Sora is a blog post and an announcement at this point. Um, but it's an interesting announcement from OpenAI. So it's basically text to video. So it has a few key features I want to highlight. One is it can create short snippets of video. I don't know the exact duration, a few minutes maybe. It can extend video forwards and backwards in time if you give it a video. It can interpolate between two input videos. Um, it can generate videos of different aspect ratios and resolutions, right? So something of importance to people in video production. Um, but I think more broadly, it kind of opens up people's eyes to the potential. And if I were to make one bold but obvious prediction, Paco,
Yeah.
and this is it, which is I think Sora's long-lasting impact may not be Sora itself, but rather the idea of Sora, much like DALI precipitated all sorts of image generators. But very few people really talk about DALI itself these days, right? So I think Sora might be more of okay, so now that it's out there, and we already know that Meta and Google are kind of building something similar, but what's to stop some other startup to do something, right?
So you're saying this is we could call it maybe a category builder because there have been tools like Runway or Pika Labs. I don't actually use those a whole lot, so I'm just mentioning, but it's just the results here are so dramatically better than what had been shown from previous kinds of tooling. So it's a category builder. Um, I'm curious about one thing. Does this, recognizing this is a blog post with some videos, basically, but is this representing somewhat of a maturing for OpenAI? Because it sure seems like they've talked a lot about working with red teaming and giving early access to get critical feedback from outside, and just a lot of things that seem to preempt some of the criticisms they had elsewhere. Are we seeing a maturing of OpenAI through this?
So I would say yes. I actually I cannot disclose the names of the organizations, but I know two or distinct organizations that I'm familiar with that are helping OpenAI with red teaming. So it could be both, right? So Paco, it could be that they are maturing, they are much more careful in releasing, but we can also be somewhat uh, skeptical in the sense that maybe they're just being careful because there's nothing really to release that's ready for prime time. In other words,
Yeah.
where if people hammer it, then it will really produce. Because a lot of the things we saw may have been kind of really kind of well crafted prompts that took 50 prompts to get to that video, right?
Cherry picking, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I think the proof is in the pudding. If this is a category builder, if this is a new jump in the ability to generate videos, the thing that'll be interesting is when it gets in the hands of people who actually have experience in filmmaking, cinematography, etc., when they can get hands-on with the tool without being guided by the marketing department from OpenAI, and see what they build with it. Yeah, that'll be interesting. Um, I guess this really kind of ups the game though, as far as potential competition to Hollywood. Is this going to amplify the friction, the concerns that have been voiced amongst more of the content community regarding AI?
So interesting enough that you say that because we're recording this and I haven't released this newsletter or post yet, but I actually have just finished a post that will go out to in my March 7th newsletter, which I will link to in the episode notes. Um, but basically, there, what I did was I looked through all the video production jobs in the US and I extracted all the skills. And then in the course of that, I kind of did an analysis of what could be the potential impact, assuming this technology is real and can produce what we think it can produce. What are the things that it can disrupt? So here's some at a high level, right? So first of all, it will definitely democratize video production, right? So it would make it so that before maybe you had to really have very specific skills and specific software. And in my post, I actually, in the course of analyzing this job postings, I actually was able to extract what the software tools that people are using these days. The other thing it can do is it can actually also enhance the production and creative process, right? Because it could allow you to do video editing and production, right? So advanced animation, maybe even simulate certain environments. It can also allow you to do storyboarding, right? So before, maybe when you do storyboarding, you just go literally post-it notes
Yeah,
on the board. Maybe now the storyboarding will be little snippets,
yeah.
right? So this is kind of AI assisted scripting and storytelling, right? So and there's various aspects of the video production process that I kind of included in this post that it might potentially automate. Now, the big caveat here is, Paco, is we don't actually know what this software can do. We just,
Yeah.
as we
Right.
described it, there's a blog post. It says, here's some samples. So then we kind of infer that. So that's why I put in my post the timeline might be 2 to 5 years for some of these things, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the one big thing might be just the storyboarding because before, like I said, you would write this will happen in this scene. Now you can maybe kind of visualize it a little bit. But like I said, maybe the end result, if I were to predict, is that like you said, it's a category builder. It opens up the possibility for other people who are much, much more focused than OpenAI to build something very specific. Now, the other thing that may hold this back is just, I would imagine the compute is intense, right?
Right. I was
So,
gonna.
so it's not something that you can go just open up to the world. You will have to charge people.
Yeah.
I mean, because the image generation, I'm a paid user for some of these image generation tools, but I would imagine they cannot just let anyone use their tools. I mean,
Yeah, that kind of came across in their PR about this was this is going to take a lot more compute. And I mean, in some ways that could be good or bad, however, but that was clearly a message. The other thing was that they were trying to mitigate real world interaction. Like you have complex scene building and you have modeling the physics. It's sort of moving further and further away from the real world into like kind of augmented or virtual worlds.
or you can, one of the things I noted was just, in the field of animation, you might be able to really cut down on the number of people. Now, as with anything else that's related to automation and AI, I don't think that necessarily eliminates jobs. It will change jobs, right?
Yeah.
So it will change jobs. So just like I think that the writing tools may not eliminate writers, it just makes writers more productive.
We
Right.
we hope so.
Yeah.
You know, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think that when people review or analyze about how is AI going to displace XYZ jobs, there's a kind of temptation for a lot of observers to race toward the highest end use cases. So when you see generative AI producing video, people talk about, okay, is this going to destroy Hollywood? When you and I worked together back at that media company
Yeah.
several years ago, I was managing three studios at one point for part of my role, and two of them were video production studios. And I think that, the thing that a lot of people don't get if they haven't worked directly in video is that the production costs are enormous. I mean, for every hour that you spend on camera, figure at least like a 20 to 1 budget. There's going to be 20 hours spent just to produce that 1 hour of content. And that's for low-end video. That's like instructional video that doesn't have a lot of production quality. When you look at feature movies, I mean, that ratio goes up by many orders of magnitude. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity on the table for exactly what you're saying. It's for these use cases that really can leverage video. They aren't necessarily like the sequel to Lord of the Rings, but they are something that's useful in business, and it certainly speaks to more appetite and demand generationally for video content.
Yeah, and just like a lot of the tools that we now take for granted have produced uh, cohort of filmmakers.
Yeah.
This yet to be released tools will produce another cohort of filmmakers with a different kind of vision for how things are made. So, all right. So now on to you, Paco. What's your first topic?
Yeah, I'm going to scroll down here. So we recently had a conference called AI in Production. It was a virtual conference from the MLOps community, and it was 2 days. It was held on consecutive Thursdays, full day, multi-track. I think it was like 3 tracks. And I wanted to highlight something that came out of that as a theme that seems to be emerging. Um, People have commented on this, but this is just kind of my coloring for the theme. What it appears is, well, first off, rolling back about a year or so ago, we've seen really amazing services coming out for endpoints, any-scale private endpoints, Hugging Face, all kinds of different companies have these
Together. Yeah.
endpoints that are used. And something that was really highlighted in the conference talks was detailed quantitative analysis of how these endpoint services are not all alike. And there are actually many attributes and they're very different. So, for instance, you could take the same exact model and run it on different endpoints and get different results. And there's a lot of rhyme and reason to that because, for instance, different vendors may be doing different quantization or different systems architecture for how they do the orchestration. There's a lot of I/O and network engineering and all that goes into it, right? So you're going to see different kinds of results coming out. Part of that is quality, but it's also things like latency and throughput and, of course, cost. And there's many dimensions. So there was two talks I'd highlight. One was Daniel Linton, our friend from Unify.ai, and they have something called Model Hub, where they're basically allowing you to, if you have a service in production and you need to be using these endpoints, can you monitor and arbitrage across different endpoint providers? So that way you can tilt for your use case. Do you need better latency responses? Do you need lower cost? Do you need better on and on? And it's really interesting how well they've quantified it. Although, the point is that Daniel was saying that they still aren't getting benchmarks as much on the accuracy side. They were looking more at other quantitative measures. But then you flip over to Arnav Singhvi, who was at Databricks. I think he's now doing grad school at Stanford. He was at Berkeley before, but he's on I don't know how to pronounce it, DSPY, DSPY, DSPy assertions, let's see. But that project that came out of Stanford recently, and there with LM assertions, they call it a new programming construct for computational constraints for language models. Um, and they're also looking at multiple dimensions of benchmarking services like this, but they're also digging into ways to express accuracy and measure accuracy. So I guess, my question is, are we seeing a different category emerge here for kind of like arbitrage across endpoints?
Yeah, or I think just to help people make decisions about how to what to use and what's appropriate, right? So, and full disclosure for our listeners, I'm an advisor to Unify, so I was privy to all of this work they did in advance of the release. So if you haven't, check it out. So what they do is in real time, they keep hammering these endpoints
Yeah,
to produce metrics, and so it could. I think some of the things they do are like time to first token, right? So
yeah,
and things like that, end-to-end latency, cost,
yeah,
uh, and I think the idea here is for accuracy, maybe you go to another thing like LMSys. But I think, Paco, the more interesting thing for me to hear is the broader trend around right now. Obviously, all of these things that we're talking about, how do I decide which endpoint to use? Assuming I know the model that I'm using, which endpoint should I use? We're still barely scratching the surface in my mind because you
right.
can imagine a world of agents, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
now I have to decide which agent I have to use and what are the key decision points. So basically, what we're talking about here is basically a set of metrics. So if you consider metrics as metadata, right? So what metadata do I need to make these decisions, right? Um, and so right now, obviously, the decisions have to be made, but they're not terribly difficult yet because let's say I already know I'm going to use Llama 70 billion. I just need to decide which endpoint, right? And if I make a mistake, okay, no big
sure.
deal.
Yeah,
But down the road, you can imagine agents and smaller services where you might have multiple metrics or metadata you need to ferret to true, right? And so I think I think to me the word might not be arbitrage. It's more like how do I decide?
yeah.
How do I decide what to? Because arbitrage to me leans towards cost, and cost may not be my main factor, right?
True. Yeah, it's different dimensions, different criteria. Um, I should note, I mean, have been projects doing chain of thought prompting where they are measuring multiple different dimensions of performance, cost being one that you can trade off. But the idea is if you can decompose a query, decompose a prompt into subtasks, and then farm these out to different agents, have them work together, you basically build out a graph of like solving the problem. But as you're going through there, there's, operations research kinds of techniques to understand how do we minimize cost.
No, no. I mean, I think it basically at some point it becomes control theory.
Sure. Yeah,
Control theory without PDEs.
although I'm going to put on my software engineering hat.
Yeah.
What I've noticed looking at like LangGraph, and I've looked at various approaches of having orchestration amongst agents. Um, And it's really interesting to me because I would have compared this with like running an ad campaign on different ad networks, which is just kind of a one-dimensional thing. Whereas what you're saying is, actually let's look at what we can do with different agents talking to each other. As I've been evaluating the software that's coming out for looking at mixtures of agents, so to speak, one thing that strikes me is we already know how to do actor pattern. I mean, we have really good software formalisms for having different agents talking with each other and exchanging messages, changing state. And I look at a lot of these projects as sort of reinventing that whole wheel of like, oh my God, what does an actor do? So I think that it's time for some of the software engineering people to like come into this area in full force.
But I guess tying it back to your the item you surfaces at this point, we're only deciding on which endpoint to use for a few models, but
Yeah.
moving forward, we'll need tools for making similar decisions, but maybe for a bigger pool of options, right?
Yeah, and I mean the ideas of like mixture of experts of how that's used, like The idea of like blending what comes out of embeddings, if you're looking through a vector database, et cetera, trying to do RAG. There's other ways of mixture vectors, but I mean that is one notion that's come out of how to have a kind of ensemble approach. And we'll definitely see, I mean, we'll talk a little bit later. There's another really large vendor that came out and is also pushing kind of mixture of experts for their foundation models. I think we'll see lots more specialization of models in particular areas like domain expertise, things like that. So, yeah, it makes sense that you would have more than just a cost trade-off. You would actually have a lot more parameters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So my now I'll introduce my next item, which is Gemini. So, all
Right.
right. So before the listeners kind of start messaging me saying Gemini sucks, Gemini is not that great. All right. So here's what I have to say about Gemini, right? So I've been experimenting with it. Uh, Now, I do not expect it to surpass GPT-4, right? So, but this is not to say that the version 1.0 Pro that I'm using through the API is producing mainly nonsensical results. Actually, it's quite good. It's not GPT-4 quality yet. However, the API is simple,
Yeah.
very stable, very fast, and very well documented. And the API goes through not just, language model, text to text. It's a multimodal model.
Yeah.
More importantly, uh, version 1.5, which is already out in limited release, will soon be available through the API. And uh, I think version 1.5 will make it work for a lot of people to check out the Gemini API. Why? One, it can handle up to 10 million tokens, so the context length is massive.
Wow.
And this is multimodal context length, right? So across text, video, and audio.
Yeah.
Um, and then it's very efficient in terms of what Google has invested in their infrastructure. For us, in terms of the people using the API, it's very efficient. It's very fast. But apparently, it's also they invested a lot of IP into making it efficient to train, which means what for us? Which means they probably will refresh this model more often. So if you check it out and you try it, all that investment will pay off. Now, again, before you message me, I understand it's not GPT-4 yet in quality, but I think the benefits I laid out will make it worth it for you to check it out.
I mean, it from their messaging, it looks like they're really they're taking aim at GPT-4 and being able to have or surpass that kind of quality. I think what's interesting, does it also seem like um, they've got this sort of multi-pronged approach. They're going after chat, so they have much better chat. They're going after large foundation model, going after GPT-4. They're going after the systems aspects of it. I mean, Google is famous for SRE and a lot of their system optimizations and being able to, like you say, refresh a model frequently. They're also going after the open source models in the sense of, something that allegedly surpasses Llama 2. It's
They have
lightweight.
smaller models, yeah.
It has commercial use allowed, safety aligned open source models. And yeah, the smaller ones, the 2 billion, that's clearly going after like a mobile market. So seems like they're taking on Meta and Microsoft and OpenAI all at the same time, but in a very systematic way. With the Gemma line of family of open source models, that seems to be signaling that could open up third-party AI apps on mobile, and it seems like that could be a really big thing for them.
And also for people who are curious about the API, it's like I said, it's very simple. It's multi-language, so I use it mainly in Python, but it also just requires applying for an API key. So
Yeah.
before you might think, oh, I don't want to try it. It's too much friction because I have to get a Google Cloud account and things like that. But not anymore. You just go to the website, get an API key, and you're good to go. And like I said, it's super fast, stable, uh, and I'm not throwing shade at OpenAI, but the API there, let's just say you have to put some logic in there for disconnect.
And also it doesn't necessarily be, it doesn't seem to be monotonically increasing in terms of accuracy on the OpenAI side. There appear to be some regressions at times. So
Or I think on the infrastructure side, I think
yeah.
Google might have a better position there. So anyway, so your next item.
Oh, well, can I put
Oh
in a
yeah.
couple other things about
Yeah.
this first about Gemini? I really like there was an article that Mateo Zaharia came out with about compound systems, not monolithic models. And so, he's saying, well, the best results are increasingly obtained where you have this kind of like ensemble approach. And this is something that Gemini is definitely pushing. So maybe we'll hear that term compound more. And I also think that, the other thing to say about,
By the way, Paco, let me jump in here. So
yeah,
actually, this compound approach relates to what you alluded to earlier, which is
yeah,
basically, you know, these language models are either chained in a pipeline, created an ensemble, mixture of experts, but ultimately, like the word you use is directed acyclic graph, right?
yeah.
Of here's my prompt, but then there's a DAG that processes your prompt and makes sure it goes to the right place.
I'm hopeful that we see more formalism. I'm hopeful that Google kind of guides this. It sounds like Mate and others at Stanford are thinking about this as well. Uh,
Mate is now at Berkeley.
oh, he's at Berkeley. Oh, showing my bias. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
sorry.
yeah, yeah,
Well, others at Berkeley will
yeah,
spearhead this.
yeah.
Um, yeah, no, it's great. I hope there's more formalism for this area. I think it's something that definitely needs a lot of definition. I think the other thing that I would mention about Gemini and Gemma is that it's interesting. Google has really pushed this partnership with NVIDIA to get tools out there in people's hands to be able to do production work on these smaller models, 2 billion models. So I'm really hopeful about that. I think that that's a great development.
Very cool. And now your next topic.
My next topic is reporting on something that has been bubbling up in definitely in the Hugging Face leaderboards. So, kind of more in the open source model community. And this is a trend that we've been seeing since early December, or let's just say, Q4 of 2023. The idea is there have been some relatively dramatic advances in terms of how to apply synthetic preference data sets. So, if people have been using RHLF. Um, Okay, so people have been doing work with getting human preferences in to align models to improve them. This is generally targeted at the fact that LLMs are trained in a very unsupervised way. It leads to unstable behaviors. But if you get the human preferences in, you can get some human feedback in and get some improvement. And this has been done with
And
PPO.
they're more adaptable, right? So,
Yeah, although it's been tricky. I mean, using PPO for this has been kind of tricky. Um, but what we're seeing is this paper that came out. I've got a link down here. There was a paper that came out called Direct Preference Optimization. Your language model is secretly a reward model. And Chelsea Finn, Chris Manning, Raphael Raphaelov, others but it came out in middle of 2023, and it's a new kind of parameterization of a reward model. So it really simplifies this idea of using preferences. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because activity over the past 3 months or so on Hugging Face has been interesting, where multiple times we've seen this applied with fairly dramatic effects. So we were talking before about Lilac, Argila, Snorkel. Um, Teams have gone in and looked at some model that's ranking on the leaderboards, like Zephyr, for instance, and gone in and in some cases developed new open source tools to apply this, identifying problems in the training data and using synthetic data sets, using preferences, DPO, to improve the models without requiring a lot of GPUs. I mean, these are relatively GPU poor teams, as they're calling themselves. But what they do is go in and fix the data, redo the model, and then the new model they produce, which is very cost effective for them, surpasses the parent model on the leaderboard. So you've seen this kind of leapfrogging effect on the leaderboards, and like I say, Argila came out with the Notice model that jumped up, and they released Distillable and fair disclosure, I'm on the board of Argila. I've been working with them for several years. But Snorkel followed up with similar results immediately after. I think Lilac is also very much in category in this area. And it's this idea of implicit reward models. So it appears that there's a lot of there's a lot of money on the table, so to speak, in terms of fixing data.
Yeah. So this is something that my friends that I'm involved with Visual Layer have found out in the computer vision space, right? So,
Yeah.
and I guess one thing that, and it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me that this happens. Now, of course, this presupposes you have access to tools like Lilac and Argila and Snorkel, right?
Yeah.
So, and also it might also help. It might help the foundation model, but if you want a custom model tuned for a very specific task, you may still need to fine tune. And I think I shared this post with you, Paco, but you know, fine tuning is great. I do it all the time, but it, it does mean that your model might be optimized for the task you fine tune it for the data set
Mm.
that you fed it, right? So once you deviate somewhat from that, there's no guarantee. So that's why people are doing RLHF. But as I pointed out in my post, RLHF unfortunately is a bit of an advanced topic, advanced topic
Definitely. Yeah.
that, and there's not actually many tools to it. So in that post, which I'll link to, I was trying to kind of highlight what are some in betweens, right? So
Yeah.
what are some in betweens where you get kind of the adaptability of an RLHF, but not as complex as RLHF? Because the fine tuning at this point, to me, is a solved problem if you're willing to go to a service like Anyscale. It's done. I mean, you just focus on your data set. But that means you might have to fine tune several models because, like I said, your fine tuning data set may be so specific. And also, there's just like any model in machine learning, there's that notion Paco, of concept drift, right? So the you may have to fine tune again and again because basically the when your model hits the real world, it may actually encounter new things, right? So.
There are some resources. Hugging Face did an in-depth comparison between different methods. So IPO, KTO, DPO, these ways of using simpler loss functions, so that it's not as complicated as before. And also Eugene Yan has an article I really like. It's called Synthetic Data for Fine-Tuning, Distillation, and Self-Improvement. And we can link both of those in the notes. Um, it does. I think that this is a fairly hopeful thing. I should note that when the Argula team was working on Zephyr, they also were able to identify areas of the training data that really worked at cross purposes. So there's more tools emerging for understanding your training sets, and in some cases, maybe just redacting the bad data will actually get you a lot of gain. That was one of the learnings they had. And to that point, I want to just put in a note that there has been the mathematicians are starting to catch up slowly but surely in this area. And I was noting recent work from one of my favorite mathematicians, David Gleich, who's now at Purdue. But Ming Lee and Tamal Day and David Gleich did a paper called Topological Structure of Complex Predictions. And the idea is they're using Reeb networks, graph topological data analysis, to go in and look at data sets and look at the outcomes for machine learning models and see which parts of the data sets are really not good, need work. And so I think this is great to have more formalisms and better tools with a strong mathematical basis. How can we prepare our data better before we go to all the expense of, I mean, even fine tuning is going to be a cost. but definitely in terms of training new models.
So fine tuning, there's the well-known hack of going to a better model to get your fine tuning data set, right?
Right, right, right.
All right. So now we close with each of us gets a quick topic. So my quick topic is AMD. So I wrote about this recently. So I think the stereotype that people have is AMD has great hardware, but the software stack is not there, and it's far from being there. So what my friends at Lamini that I'm involved with have pointed out to me is that actually once they dug into it, ROCm and that AMD software stack is closer to 80 to 90% there. So then what they did specifically for fine tuning and serving and training LLMs is that they closed that gap. So maybe that, but what they're doing is only available on their platform, but that gives you an inspiration that maybe it's not as uh, uh, out of reach
Yeah.
as people would think that CUDA has such a huge gap in terms of the software stack. And there's many reasons why I think I would expect that more people will pay attention to closing that gap on the AMD side, right? Because I just checked before the podcast, Paco, the H100, NVIDIA H100 now runs at 30,000. $30,000, right? So,
Speaking of opportunities on the table, yeah,
so
there's
I
a
mean,
lot of room in between.
I think there's going to be a lot of motivation to make that move. So my prediction is that maybe the software stack for AMD will get better in 2024. So
Very
on
good.
to you.
I look forward to that. Okay, my quick topic is about there's been a few teams publishing recently how to augment RAG, and in particular how to do knowledge graphs to augment RAG. So just a quick recap on this. Nebula Graph has a really good demo online, RAG with knowledge graphs, and so you can do some open source work comparisons you can run. They've got a nice Streamlit demo. Um, Llama Index and KuzuDB collaborated a few months ago. They put out a Kuzu Graph demo, also doing RAG with Knowledge Graph. And of course, Microsoft, recently published about GraphRag, about how they use LLMs to generate a knowledge graph and then use that to answer the questions. And they're saying that consistently outperforms baseline RAG on the metrics they're showing. We'll link to some of these docs. And just to recap it all, my friend Louis Guiton recently did a talk called Graphs and Language, where he runs across these and looks at different strategies for augmenting RAG, whether you're using vector databases or working with knowledge graphs or however hybrid approaches, and does some good comparisons. He's got some code you can also run if you want to try these out, some notebooks and all. So we'll link these in the show notes.
So I'm sold because basically I believe that even simple metadata will help RAG. So let alone a knowledge graph. So my pet peeve here, Paco, is we need tools to actually create that knowledge graph.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting because I have an article also we can link, but there have been several research projects which are essentially using LLMs to create computable graphs. So the idea is if you think about Copilot, you think about how you can use a large language model to generate code. What if you step back and say, well, a little bit simpler task would be let's generate a DSL code in a restricted language, and that language is a computable graph. And when you compute it, you get the answers you want. That's kind of how Microsoft approached this. That's how others. One of my favorite is Robert Logan out of UC Irvine, and he did that project in 2019 before, I mean, it was like a year before the RAG paper was published. So I think that there are some indications of going toward leveraging LLMs for code generation. And I just got back from Dagstuhl workshop on knowledge graphs, where this kind of like how do we use LLMs to generate KGs? We're exploring in detail. We'll have some more coming out about that.
Yeah, yeah. And if any listener wants to make an impact in that space, that's the area that's the itch I would scratch.
Let us know.
And with that, thank you, Paco.
Thank you, Ben.